Okay, you can start.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for giving me this wonderful opportunity to talk about uh, something open and full of excitement like Utopia at a moment of being locked up and being oppressed by almost everything. And due to your generosity and the generosity of the technology being not only available outside of the confinement, but being not only in utopia but in pantopia. So we are always everywhere. And I would like to start beyond thanking saying that it's really a fascinating topic at that moment to discuss. And we'll have to find out what actually utopias can do for us. This is more important than actually trying to find out what utopias are and the esoteric aspects of their workings. So I I would like to start by saying that Utopia is actually one of the most significant uh, creations of humanity. It's partially a creation of humanity and partially an exploitation of the competence of our biology, of our brain, and of our social interaction. I will start saying how we'll proceed. I will not try to define what is utopia because actually, if we try to do it, we'll find out that it is next to impossible. It's a slippery situation. And as soon as we claim this is what utopia is about, somebody can come up and say, but what about this case? And what about utopia, which is actually very much inside reality and so on. So, what I'm proposing is a kind of technique um, to borrow Wittgenstein's idea of family resemblances, that the identity of utopia is actually identifiable without identifying it by following the chain of multiple shifting, chaotic, uncircumscribed ways of acting and reacting at different times, occasions, natural and human, something that we call that has been called utopia. In fact, what is called utopia was in use before the name utopia was fabricated by Thomas More, 1516, as most people know. Very much like Molière's Monsieur Jourdain, qui fait la prose sans savoir, fabricated, we have fabricated and consumed utopias without having a name for that. Generally, these are works that appear to contrast the inferior quality of the here and now in contradistinction to a place and time whose factuality is indeterminate. Now, utopias in this case, according to this very vague and fuzzy definition, can be found in Homer, can be found in the Old Testament, can be found in the text of the normal thesis the establishment of law by Lycurgus, as presented by Plutarch, and certainly it can be found in the birds of Aristophanes and most of his works. Here today I will start and end my discussion to have a feeling of utopia and not a definition with a case of Marquis de Condorcet and his wife Sophie de Condorcet, and the second part of the 18th century in Paris, or for short, the story of Sophie and Nicolas. Why we choose that? One of the reasons is that during these wicked days of pandemic virus infection, confinement, social distancing, Me Too, and exit, resisting without resistance, and of uncritical crisis, I, together with William, were thinking a little bit nostalgically about the Paradise Now post-May 1966 days when we did research at the Bibliothèque Nationale working on a special, among other things, issue of the Revue du 18e siècle dedicated, of all things, on sain and malsain, healthy and unhealthy at that moment, was not viewed as today in terms of how we can defeat a pandemic, but in terms of applying the excuse of health for policing societies. But I will avoid this issue for the moment. And it was at that moment that uh, we developed two articles. One was by myself introducing and editing the memoir inédit sur les hôpitaux, a report by Marquis de Condorcet written around 1786. It was part of a group of studies undertaken what Condorcet was doing by the Académie des Sciences to find a solution to replace the old medieval Hôtel Dieu hospital in the middle of Paris, which was threatening not only the health of the society, but also the social order, very much a situation like today. What actually the task of Condorcet was to coordinate invited proposals of how to replace the Hôtel Dieu. Many people, fewer architects, mostly engineers, medical doctors participating, providing proposals which were based on structures, spatial structures, to aerate the space of this confinement of unhealthy people, because I won't enter into theories which do not hold anymore true of uh, unhealthiness, of disease uh, developed by putrefied air. This is a pre-microbial science, but also pre-scientific according to contemporary science is how air moves around to aerate. Again, I won't enter into that, and there were many rather naive ideas by aspiring engineers and doctors about how we can irate. The debate continues today, believe it or not, in relation to our pandemic virus. Condorcet was administrating this whole business as member of the academy, but behind him, this concrete idea, behind this, in a way, utopia, because the proposals were physical, unprecedented patterns of enclosing and opening space as a machine, for some people as a political machine, also to enclose and manipulate the people. Condorcet looked at that from another point of view. Immediately in his mind came the idea, why one central device to confine disease instead of a decentralized distributor pattern? Why something which is under a centralized authority and not something which is decentralized, based in the quartier, in the neighborhoods of Paris, controlled by the participation possible of all people of the neighborhood, specialists and non-specialists, who experiment, discuss, debate, achieve something, and communicate it to the rest. Now, this idea was finally didn't win the most of the engineers and medical doctors, but the debate was mostly central on the pattern of those highly uh, highly centralized machines of aeration. And the debate was stopped because the revolution arrived and everything was upside down. In the same issue of La Revue du 18e siècle, Lefebvre and I contributed an article on the ideas of the therapeutic function of landscapes and of the 18th century under the title Sentimental Geometry and the Therapeutic Landscape. Here, the patient, not the patient, did not suffer from an epidemic miasma. His sickness, grave, painful, according to the author, was caused by a social condition, his expulsion from the community. The alienated, the exiled person was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the texts were published as Reverie, Dreaming, Daydreaming, du promeneur solitaire, of a solitary person strolling, which he wrote between 1776 1778, about the same time that Condorcet and doctors and engineers dealt with the Hotel Dieu. Rousseau's utopias took many other forms. In other words, Rousseau texts of making something to avoid pain, to overcome unhappiness, took many ways. many of them highly political, that cost him quite a lot, including the exile from his own Swiss liberal community. Here, in the fifth promenade, Rousseau describes how he recovered the pain by an antidote, which was isolation. So, defeating the pain of exile by another further level isolation. But this is psychological isolation in a dream. The alternative world that conducts that he proposes is a situation of moving water, reflections, aromas, shaking leaves of trees, inside which the individual daydreaming forget all pains of the existing factual reality. Condorcet, now let's come back to Condorcet, was elected in 1769 member of the Académie des Sciences. In 1776, he became secretary, secretary perpetuel, and his popularity with the other members was due to his optimistic feeling that the world ills would be overcome through science that delivers truth. In his um, uh, next to his memoir, with 2 years difference, uh, Mémoires sur les hôpitaux, he wrote another memoir, Essai sur l'application et analyse de décisions, in other words, on how an assembly of people, an open, unregulated, uncontrolled, non-hierarchical assembly can come into a combined, synthesized decision which represents l'intérêt général, the interest of all the participants. Contrary to recent comments, the conclusion of Condorcet, which was arriving at a paradox that participatory voting assemblies of governed by majority are leading to an undesirable conclusion. Contrary to that, people have interpreted his conclusion as being undemocratic, as being refusing the possibility of a better society through the assemblies, the post-revolutionary assemblies. Maybe this is what contributed that a few years later, although he had joined the revolution, he is imprisoned and ends his life, his body disappearing, and an empty box in the Pantheon reminding us of his presence. The same time as he is in prison, his wife, Sophie, is writing to him a series of letters. The letters are expressions of personal love and personal sympathy, but also of about sympathy in general. That is, the community of people who are finding happiness in being bound together in what we call community, a term which she is not using. Interestingly, Sophie grounds the reason, grounds the validity of this claim on the innateness of human beings whose actions are driven on one hand by egoism and search for hedonistic satisfaction, on the other hand, by the sympathy of doing things together. Now, what's very interesting is that she goes further, claiming that the unhappiness at that time of humanity, including her personal unhappiness and the upcoming um, execution of her husband, is due to the institutions which cultivate and support inequality and extreme selfish behavior. Although her text is highly, highly subversive, still, because it was published on a more calm situation during the uh, Bonapartean order. She is not published, but continues claiming the idea of community, sympathy, and equality of all people, equality of all classes, and equality between men and women. And we find her actually dying a very different situation from her husband in a home full of people debating peacefully with her the utopia, the coming society. Now, the two texts are searching to find a new situation, but also they are utopians, but also express a psychological situation which Laurence Lebras, a curator of Bibliothèque Nationale today, just last year in a fantastic exhibition about people stating before their people stating their hope dans la situation extrême, that is situations before death, before execution, before love loss, before mourning whatever loss. So this is the nature of the psychological nature of both texts. But as most of the people, most of the documents of Laurence Lebras in her exhibition reveal is the undying hope. Now, as I mentioned before, the Condorcet text has been uh, seen as a rejection of the possibility of democracy. This is a mistake. More about that in the end of this talk, which is coming up soon. I hope I haven't tired you completely. How am I doing in terms of time? Am I okay? Yeah. Okay. Now, let's come back to the general question. What are utopias? What are those texts which keep on having a different device, a different attitude towards reality? What are they about? Now, let me review once more the chaotic situation. If we look at a very contemporary text of Gaston Bachelard, Le droit de rêver, the right to dream, 1970, he repeats very much the argument of Rousseau. In a dream, daydream, or a cultivated artifact that brings about this state of non-thinking, happiness is defeating pain. In a way, it's like a mask projected on a painful face. Years before, Aristophanes put in the mouth of his birds the possibility of happiness in the ethereal world where forever people free of any power find a liberation. Now, Aristophanes' text is not a utopia in the sense of what we have been discussing. He doesn't project something which is desirable. In fact, he warns us in this situation where humanity will become birds. What are those birds going to do? And he predicts already the drones. They will fly all over, spying on each other and getting rewards by, as he used the term, sycophants, lying about what other people are doing. In short, the Aristophanes text is a negative utopia, and by being a rejection of a positive utopia, in fact, creating the possibility of start speculating a even higher level utopia. Now, let me review very quickly other positions of people. Uh, Recently, during the last 50 years, Mannheim's theory about utopias became very popular. Mannheim popularizes and manipulates Marxist ideas about the possibility of an alternative world and the need of daydreaming. He doesn't call it that, but going beyond the matter of factness, shifting to another reality, and out of that being able to improve the world. I'm concluding by some other alternative
Mr.
theory.
Tzonis, I'm sorry to interrupt.
To that,
I hate to interrupt.
I
I have
need
to remind
3 more
you.
minutes. Do I have them? Okay.
2
So
minutes.
I would like to very quickly bring in this uh, research of a possible interpretation of what utopias have been, of being possibilities for making mental experiments. And there is considerable research that actually knowledge, factuality moves based on the possibility of exploring alternativeness, even if this alternativeness appear to be contrary, counterfactual. However, coming back, there is another side. It is not only, oh, let me conclude. So, given a higher level of knowledge and science, then human happiness, as Condorcet claimed in his last work, can come about. However, human happiness is restrained by laws and not only by facts, but by deliberate lies, as Madame Condorcet already stated in her letters. We are becoming completely enclosed by the world of false news and false factualities, and we need to come out of it. How do we do that? Quickly, I will give credit, of course, to Aristotle and his idea of catharsis through defamiliarization. Now, defamiliarization is an idea usually associated by Brecht and Trotsky, but in fact, Aristotle had a name, catharsis, cleansing up. Now, let me finally come to a real conclusion. On one hand, you need this distraction of familiarization that makes you and closes you in a world of lies. On the other hand, as Maimonides already warned, human beings are human beings. They need something material, something they can sense through her material reality. And this is why we need fabulation. So that's another idea of what the utopias do. They use allegory to take problems, sociological, political, and so on, and dress them in a kind of fable to make you understand them. So make you be coming out of the false world, but also coming in a reality which may be very abstract to be easily conceived by a physical human being. So I come to my last conclusion. And my last conclusion is maybe the priority today is not so much to ask what utopia is, but and what and to inquire into innumerable dead ends, but inquire what utopia has done to us in history and still does today, and what we can do with this in art and politics in sympathy. Thank you.
Thank you so